Welcome back to the Business Roundtable Podcast. I am your host, David Carr, and I've got a brand new guest this week with me, Axel Tillmann of Pitch Global. We're going to get into some great topics today about how you as a business owner can help, or entrepreneur, in this case, scale smarter, help build your company and investment and actually go even global. That's what I'm very excited to have Axel here because he has a global experience and background. Welcome to the podcast, Axel. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, David. It's a great pleasure to be there. It's an honor, and I'm looking forward to what we have to discuss today.
Absolutely. Now, Axel, when we were talking a few weeks ago, and you have a wealth of experience being a serial entrepreneur, an investor. You've helped be a venture builder, startup advisor, international expansion expert here. So you bring such a wealth of experience, and we're so excited to have you here on the podcast and really focus on real world lessons that founders who want to fund, scale, expand their businesses, how do they do it intelligently, wisely in today's environment? And things are continuing to change and evolve. So, you have such a diverse background here, Axel. Would love to share a little bit about your background and what kind of drives your passion for helping particularly entrepreneurs succeed, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with our audience.
So I immigrated 34 years ago from Germany, and while I still have my connection to the country I was born in, I have appreciated the transition I was able to go through coming to America, starting businesses here, making successful exits. And whatever I learned on that pathway is not something that I learned in Germany. And recently I read a study in Europe that, and somebody commented on it, which just happens to be the Prince from Oranje in Holland, who is very deeply involved in the startup community. And they said, oh, Holland fell 2 points below Germany, to which I answered, it really doesn't matter, 2 points. You're 50% below the values of the United States and the startup companies there. So when you say, what can you learn from your global experience? My biggest learning was that everything I needed to learn was not in the kindergarten, but was in Silicon Valley.
Oh, wow. Well, we're excited to get in there because, as you and I were talking, there's a lot of things that, businesses need to consider when they're starting up, where they're growing. And, you can help. One of the things we love about the Business Roundtable podcast is it gives people an opportunity to listen from others that have gone before them and help avoid some of these pitfalls or gain insights that they wouldn't have otherwise. So, that's why we love having you here on the podcast, Axel. But when we're thinking about a startup or something that's like, hey, I want to be fundable. I want to get that. Obviously there's a pitch, but what's beyond kind of that pitch? What's that? What should be looking at us if you're like really trying to grow and start something?
Before I would pitch with all my knowledge that I have today, I would actually strongly recommend that without development of everything, you can actually create ideas on a PowerPoint or even on a sheet of paper. You need to talk to your number one. Who's the number one,
Who's the number one?
Who is the number one? The customer.
Who's going to buy from you, right? Right?
Because
who's the one that's going to say, I want this product or service?
You need to say, hey, I'm thinking about this type of a solution. Tell me, does this fit any particular problem you're having today? And by the way, are you willing to pay for it if I would bring you the solution? I actually lost the company by doing the right thing and then still not following the advice that I heard. So we went out, we had a customer focus group. We were in the development technology tool area, and the customers, the engineers, told us we will never use this tool. And my CTO came afterwards to me and says, we just need to try harder to convince them. No. The message was we need to pivot and do something else with the technology, deliver end product. And we didn't do this. And eventually the company went under, right? But today, if we would have pivoted correctly, the company would be highly successful.
I think we might have talked about this, but I pick up the term. I think you might have told me this before, but this is kind of like a founder blindness. We're blinded by what we think they need, but in reality, you got feedback from the engineer said, you know what, we're not going to use this. And they told you point blank, and you still thought, well, let's push ahead and figure out, and you're getting feedback. Like, what's that saying? You're a solution in search of a problem. Sometimes
That's absolutely correct. And by the way, the industry had a problem, but they were not willing to accept this. So there is a thing that's called NIH, not invented here syndrome, right? I went on the top level. I met John Chambers. I promoted the technology. He promoted me into his organization, and I failed on the engineering level because the engineers said you can never be as good as we are, although they were never really good. And you need to be willing to listen. The second startup company in which I did the right thing, I interviewed the customers about a technology idea. And what I heard was I created a new product from what I heard. And then my CTO came to me and says, I would never want to build this product. That's too primitive for me. And he ignored a $1 billion market, and we separated our ways. So that can happen. And you need to be willing to be firm on your ground. What I do not like is that people spend $2 million, $3 million, $4 million without ever having an answer. Who is going to buy this for what and what reasons? And that's the core fundamental mistake. What they say is, wow, we are catering to a $10 billion market or a $100 billion market. Throw big numbers at the wall. Everybody shouts excited. Or in today's world, everybody throws the word AI in there, even though that I saw the same pitch deck 2 years earlier with no AI in it, just in the desperate hope that somebody is going to listen to this, but they always ignore the fundamental. Who's going
to buy it? As you're saying that, Axel, it's funny. I was just in a meeting with some others today, and we were talking about, finding, the clients, the people that want to buy. And one of the advices that I heard, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, is like, to this point of be curious, ask questions, survey, really get clear on what the like you said, the desire is out there, the need out there. I think oftentimes people, they don't realize, like you said, there is an actual need, but you have to kind of uncover that, because they don't realize, oh, there could be a solution to my problem. I just kind of live with it, right? Can you talk a little bit how you've been able to uncover that?
It requires a deep sense of understanding what, for example, budgets mean, and for what budgets are actually assigned in organization. You need to be able to abstract your technology into meaningful terms. You cannot be feature rich going into a discussion. If anything at all, you want to talk about benefits. But the number one thing is, hey, we are thinking about, in this particular area, a technology solution. Tell me, what are your today's problems? Are you having any problems? And then the customers are typically open up and tell you, yeah, this is what I really need. And that says, our solution could actually help with this. So let's transition from the thought what the technology needs to deliver to what would it be worth to you? Yeah. If I have to spend $10 million in development, I need to get customers that on the average pay me $1 million, or I will not get there. And that determines what type of sales organization I put together. All of these thought processes are done far too late, if at all. And then you're running out of money. You're very sad. Maybe somebody is giving you extra money, but then they're going to move you to a different position because they feel you need to be a new CEO to potentially drive the value forward. All of these mistakes can be mitigated right up front.
Yeah, I mean, so I hope everybody's listening to this. This is so powerful what Axel's talking about, doing this work up front ahead of time. Sometimes we get ahead of ourselves. And I'm sure Axel, I mean, particularly investors that are savvy are going to start asking some key questions, right? There's some red flags there of investors if this hasn't been thought through, or what your process. Can you share a little bit about that too?
So let us arbitrarily assume I got the ear of an investor and they are excited about the technology. And now in your deck, you come to the revenue development, which means you're talking about the potential market size, you're talking about how you bring it to market, and so on. The biggest mistake is, there are these typical terms, TAM, total addressable market, and then you go all the way to SAM and SOM, serviceable and obtainable market versus serviceable and addressable market. And they say, oh, we are getting 5% of this market. And that's big red X, when you're tilting the quality flippers, done, game over.
Nope.
Why? Because this is not how the world works, right? You need to have an understanding, and you ideally have this dissected. Which particular market vertical do you feel is the most ready for your solution? Where did you hear in your interviews that they are willing to spend money to solve the problem they are having? And are they already in the current fiscal year, ready to spend some money? And then you tell them, the investor, I have already talked to A, B, C, D corporation, and ideally you have letter of intents, but you have a more defined process that you can demonstrate. And how do you scale now the first 4 customers up to 20 customers and so on? It's not a percentage game, right? That's everybody makes that almost wrong. Even I have seen entrepreneurs that are for the 5th time in the business, they still are now falling in love with their old past success and say, we're going to get 6% of the market, and that's already $1 billion market. No, this is not how it works.
Yeah. Oh, well, you're definitely hitting on an area that I wanted to get into too. Is like I said, what is this go-to-market strategy, like you said, and how do we get it right instead of the founders making the mistake again and again? Because obviously it's very costly when you're trying to get all this money, trying to get all this in place. And it isn't, like you said, it isn't just marketing. There's these gaps you're bringing up in this go-to-market strategy and some things that we need to consider. So the reason I love having you on here, Axel, because in Steward our business, I'm a small fry, if you will, in this space and growing, but I see and I want to help business owners that we're going to get to and how they can build and scale their teams. But if you can't get this right, and if you're like, getting yourself out there, you're kind of dead in the water here. And so, getting to market is really not just marketing, but it's a leadership and strategic exercise of how we're going to approach this.
And the other element that is always missing is a misunderstanding of the competition. One big no is to go actually into a meeting session and say, we don't have any competition.
Yeah.
Because then you become an evangelist, right, for a new religion. And let us assume you would be even right with what you're trying to promote. By the time you have spent all the money to evangelize where there is no traction yet in the market for the idea, the big boys come in and the wave is rolling over you because you ran out of steam at that point in time. But the other big mistake is I see competitive analysis done in form of tables, and your company gets green check marks for every single feature, and everybody else gets a red X in order to demonstrate how outstanding you are. And when I get those people on the call, I will tell them, so you're basically telling me that their customers, some have $20 million revenue, some have 30, they are all idiots, they are paying money for nothing? Or did you give me a skewed competitive analysis? That's what they really do, skewed competitive analysis. And as an investor, you know that they are going to try not to be honest with you and tell you what's really going on and how you fit into the market. The ignorance of not knowing where your place is in the market will cost at least a few $1 million. It may cost you the entire company, and it may cost you the investment round.
So important. You're bringing me back, Axel. At one point, I was working with a company, and we did a business improvement plan, and we had to go through and do our competition or analysis there. And you're right, you have to be real. Don't just look for people that are just kind of like giving you the pat yes answer and no, there's no issue there. I think you're right, Axel. We got to be a good advisor, somebody that's is going to tell you the truth, even if it's hard to hear. And if you have to look at this, and it's going to be, we need to look and be based in reality here. And again, that's why we have Axel here on, from his background on Pitch Global, so you guys can connect with him. We're gonna have a lot of resources and be able to get a hold of him at the end of this podcast. We'll make sure all those show links in there. But I think it's so important that you're asking Axel the important questions. That's what I hear keep coming up. You got to be asking these questions and be critical, and have somebody that has experience in this so that they can, really get at that and see where are the gaps. That's what a true advisor, a consultant is going to be able to help you do, to fix that. And actually, really what you're saying, what I hear, Axel, is really validate this demand that's really out there and this buying behavior. Can you actually, show that really is there?
I mean, I often say that I'm not the motivational speaker that somebody expects you to be, but I don't do anybody a favor if I say, well, great pitch, fantastic product, if I don't actually see that it is, right? I may cost you your company only to be nice to you. That makes really no sense, right? So I rather be very honest and tell you what I have listened to over 3,000 pitches in the last 8 years. Have about 300 companies that I had in different lengths of time that I consulted. Pitch Global as an organization, which at the core, it's basically my partner, Kaustav Chowdhury or Casey, and myself. We have helped companies understand their principles and have raised over $1 billion. And we don't even have a fund at this point in time. So
amazing.
We are just relying on the feedback and the information that we can translate from this humongous pool of experience. Believe me, there's not a pitch that I haven't heard one way or another. There is not a technology area that I haven't heard. The question is, are you having a better mousetrap potentially?
Yeah, think about that. I mean, just the number of pitches you've heard, Axel. I think I'm just the wealth of knowledge you have and experience in that is so important. I mean, as a business owner myself, I've noticed how I've had to keep working through my pitch, even as existing, and how I'm getting out to the market. And so having somebody like Axel that has seen this in quite a scale and in many different ways, so valuable. And I think sometimes, it's unfortunate, but I think founders or, entrepreneurs, they go too long alone instead of like getting somebody and getting involved and getting the feedback early on to see if this is viable or not. They're spending so much time and money in it for what, instead of the earlier on and investing in working with somebody like yourself, Axel, for example.
Yeah, that I feel always sad when a company needs to close after $3 to $5 million have been burned and you didn't get any results. And very often that could have changed. It may not have been the original idea. Good founders from bad founders separate each other on the ability to pivot. And because any idea, even validations with customers at the end of the day, is only an initial step into the right direction, but things you cannot anticipate. For example, if you wanted to produce in China, that's not a good idea right now, right? The tariffs would have made your product in the consumer world probably not very competitive. But you don't know this when you start out that these things can happen. So therefore you need to pivot. And maybe originally our US production is not very attractive, is now all of a sudden very attractive. And the quicker you make that decision, the better you are off. A competitor that you didn't know about appears in the market and tries your own slogan you came up with. How do you analyze the competitor? How do you become better? And how do you carve out a market? And by the way, I love competition. because competition demonstrates that it's actually a market, right? Versus
There
no
you go.
competition.
Yeah, competition is not a bad thing. If anything, I mean, it's so funny. You say competition, but you go, it used to be malls and food courts, but you go to the places, there's like similar businesses in geographic areas, right? Because they want people to go in there, and they're literally, they're quote unquote a competitor, but you're getting multiple people going there to have choices in the market, like you said. They're coming, and so don't be afraid of competition. But I agree with you that that means there's demand, right? There's an interest in what you have to sell, what you have to offer.
Yeah.
How do you make it unique and new, right?
Then you need to be sharp about this.
Yes.
If you identify a market, let's talk about as simple as candle business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. But how you get it from selling one candle here and there to make $10 million in revenue every single year, that's where the real difficulty is, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you separate yourself with what type of marketing, with what type of ingredients lists? Did you find a niche there that nobody else has covered?
Mm-hmm.
And can you cover it well enough with first mover advantage so that they don't step over you at a later point in time? Consumer products, which I really personally don't like as a market, is so much harder to maneuver than B2B environments.
Yeah. Well, you brought. I love the word pivot. What you said earlier, and having to know, it doesn't mean necessarily you have to change everything. It just means you have to shift here. And one of the things that drew me to talking with you, Axel, too, was in this journey of a business as growing is this overall organizational health. How do we do this? And as founders start scaling, like you mentioned, okay, we're growing. What's the leadership shift they need to make to avoid bottlenecks? Like, so they could be growing, it's great, and then there's a bottlenecks or ultimately a collapse, actually, unfortunately, because they didn't think further enough along the journey of the life of the business.
I had didn't turn out to be a client, but a potential client at one point in time, and he said, for what we found out, it's in the labor-related space. It's with certain claims associated in the gig economy world, and he said, we are currently a team of 25, but guess what happened yesterday? Uber wants to move the entire driver force into our space. I said, that will be a classic example of implosion by success. So how many drivers does Uber have in the United States? And I made the number, probably 500,000 or so. If you only assume that 5% of the drivers daily have a problem that you need support for, you have to have 100 and something was a number of support agents that spend 10 minutes per potential customer on the phone to just listen to their problems. You're currently 20 people. How long does it take you to train 100 people on the intricacies of your technology and solution so that they can intelligently answer? And by the way, 100 people in support need the same amount of people in the central office, in the back office. So you are growing the company from 20 to 250. Everything will be lost at that point in time. Yeah, you know the chain letter by voice, right? You tell a story to one person, they tell it to 100 other people, and the last person tells it back to you, and it has no similarity left to what you originally told the first person. That's what's going to happen, because you cannot transfer the company mission to the new hires fast enough.
Oh man, you're hitting on so many different points there, Axel. I mean, because I think sometimes the founders, and I've worked with the founders of businesses, as they grow, they, like you said, they think somehow, I think you said, will this be just by osmosis, our mission, our vision, our values? Will that just kind of go through and just flow through our team? And it doesn't, unfortunately. Maybe those initial people around the founder, right, that they got it, and they might still have some of that. But if it's not intentional, every time you add more people on another layer, it's getting potentially further away. And this is where I feel like businesses can lose sight of what their calling was, or what they're really and they don't pivot like you were saying, Axel. They kind of stay in one area and they haven't adjusted.
Also, just the technicality. Typically in high-tech sales, you put a quota per salesperson of 3, maybe you're lucky, $5 million per person. So think of the financials alone. These high-tech salespeople expect a base salary of $120,000, $150,000 plus side, and then, of course, bonus payments based on their sales. Mm-hmm. So you want to have a $50 million company at $5 million per salesperson. You already know that you need to have at least 10 people, and $50 million means that you have them in place for 2 years because of sales cycles before you hit $50 million in sales. So think of the financial apparatus. In addition, each sales guy in the US in high tech has an SE associated with it. So you double that number up. Then internal teams, R&D, because the more customers you talk to, the more problems and features are being asked of you to put in or to be solved. So now all of a sudden, a $50 million company has to be somewhere around 100 to 150 people. And I am a strong believer that Mother Nature has shown us a path to the most beautiful and stable growth, and that's known as Fibonacci sequence. And Fibonacci's growth pattern is at best 2x. Year over year. So can you do in the early days 4x? Yeah, you can grow sales from 500,000 to 2 million in the first year because you're fresh into the market. But then competition exists and everything else. And now your growth pattern needs to be more fundamentally organized. And therefore, also the old, we're going to sell the company in 4 years is a laughable comment because it takes for good companies about 12 to 15 years before they exit.
Yeah. No, I can affirm that, Axel, because to take something, grow it, actually, like you said, can you structure it for this autonomy? Can it actually continue to maintain itself, right? Leadership bench in there. I having worked with a smaller environmental consulting firm, for example, that get, they're growing, but the owner is still very, very much in the day-to-day. And if you pull that owner or founder out, there wouldn't be a lot of value, in my opinion, left in that business if they didn't structure it well. And it does take time, like you said, Axel, over the life of a business to get all that established. It doesn't happen. And even in, like you said, I work with folks that work with, mergers and acquisitions and sales teams. And to get the team in a desirable place, that takes years in prep to get sure that it hasn't been maintained, but make sure it gets, what's that transition look like? You can't just say, well, let's just do this and we'll make it, it's not a quick, easy transition as much as we'd like it to be. It's just, it isn't. And so, again, the passion that you and I have talking about what Steward Your Business comes in and helping with stewarding people and working with the processes and systems and developing that, again, much like we were talking earlier on, sometimes those founders or those business owners don't think about some of these things of a pitch or a new product or service line. They don't think through all of this a little bit more, and hiring somebody like yourself ahead of time versus spending a lot of time and money and then going, oh, that didn't work. It's why we have this Business Roundtable podcast, so that we do have resources where you can get plugged in there. I want to get to a couple more areas before we get to the end of the podcast here, because there's just so much, Axel, you have, but you have such a wealth of global expansion, cross-border entrepreneurship. And I want you to at least share a little bit with our listeners, and we may have to have you come back on this one, but I think it's so important because we live in a global world. We're hearing about tariffs, we're hearing about challenges here in the market, and so just walk us through a bit of some things that founders should consider, and particularly right now, I would love to get your timely. We're recording this at the end of April 2025 here. Your thoughts here on some of the realities that they need to prepare for.
So to give you 2 examples that global is not an easy task to do, I give you Walmart. Walmart went to Germany And I could have told them what they're going to do wrong, but they didn't do their homework and lost about $3 billion and retracted from Germany. Now, would I believe that Walmart, with its financial power, could have conquered Germany? Absolutely. But after they put $3 billion losses on the table, they had no more desire to sustain that or pivot out of there. And one of the biggest competitors that they probably didn't realize on day one, they sold the remains of Walmart Germany to the biggest competitor at the time. In reverse, you cannot use German mentality and business principles and trying to run an American company. That's called Daimler Chrysler, which cost Daimler, I think, close to $8 billion as a mistake. And so, first of all, I would do and try to do business where my home market is. And the United States of America is the largest. Yes, we have cultural centers, but still the buying group is the largest homogeneous market with an identical messaging across board. Go to Europe, which is a financially equally viable market, but the French mentality is different from the German mentality, than from the British, than from the Italian, from the Spanish, from the Hungarian. So you need to be able to conquer those markets very specifically and understand whether the problem you have identified in the US is actually applicable to the same problem understanding in, for example, Germany. I've seen also many US companies make a mistake. They said, oh, let's put the European headquarters to the UK. But they don't realize that German customers really don't like UK sales managers to come over and tell them any storyline. They want to hear from German people much more. They wouldn't even listen to closer neighbors like France. So that means you have a totally different cost structure, but you have also some advantages. A typical salesperson in Germany in the high-tech business can also be his own SE. They are somehow better equipped to do technical tasks at the same time. But it is a mistake to assume that any problem you identified in the US translates to any other country in the world.
You made me think of a funny story. As you said that, Axel, I think which car company was that made the Nova. They made that car, the Nova, right? And then trying to sell it in Mexico. Nova means no go. They just use the same name of the car, and they're like, I'm not going to buy a car that says no is a no go car, but they use the same name because it worked great in the United States, and they didn't even think about rebranding it and different name.
Take a look at this. What do the Americans call this symbol?
Okay, A-OK.
Yeah, except in Europe, it's a-hole.
Yeah, that's a totally different meaning.
Totally different meaning, absolutely. So it takes a lot of exercise to understand that nothing is translatable. And by the way, translation is a very bad exercise. You need to transpose. So when I get German text, and I help sometimes to convert into American English, and I have to be specific on that one, then I just try to understand what they try to say and try to express equivalency fitting for the American culture. So Google Translate, or even a real normal translator that is not a going-to-market strategist, cannot understand how to translate this into the given culture, right? So that's why I call the process transposing and not translation.
I like that. I mean, what I'm hearing loud and clear from you, Axel, is you have to have humility when you're in different cultures. Adaptability completely matters, and you just can't just go charging in there and think, well, we did this place or this way, it's going to work everywhere. I know we're in a global marketplace, but still, you've got to consider these things And really take it back home too. It's like the more you niche it down and you can get it to the right person, the messaging makes all the difference. I see business owners too, Axel, that try to do this. They try to be like, say, who's your client? Well, anybody can be my client. Well, that means if anybody can, nobody can eat too. You're speaking to nobody. So like, how can you make it more meaningful and focused, and to when you're putting something out there, is it meaningful to them? Not so much about me. It's really, what do they think? Like you said early at the very beginning of this podcast, are they going to buy from you? Are they the ones that are interested, right, Axel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem is that we are, first of all, the biggest mistake you can probably as a company make is to have fallen in love with your own technology. Then that moment you actually lose focus on asking and willing to listen to the right questions. You talked earlier about yes sayers, right? The least amount of people you want to be around are the people that always say yes to you, because then one day the big no comes, and that be unfortunate. That could be the end of either your career with your startup company because they're going to make a change, or your entire startup company could be at stake at that point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no is important, or people pushing back or asking the tougher questions absolutely is important. You don't want to surround yourself with just yes people. And so I know we're getting close to the end of the episode here, Axel, and you have so many great insights, and I want to go further. We're gonna have you come back, but you've been so successful in traveling the world. You are able to work, in multiple different countries. You've been able to sustain yourself without burning out. And I just want to say, this is a person, as you guys are listening, taking it, that you can look and see, from the fruits of his own life and Pitch Global, that this is a person that, has approached leadership and entrepreneurship in a very healthy, holistic way. As we're wrapping up, Axel, I just want to give you an opportunity to share, last bit of maybe advice or takeaways that, you want to share with those that are either maybe they haven't started, they're looking to start their funding process, or maybe they're already in the middle of it and they're hitting a wall. But what would you say you want to leave with them? Some final thoughts here.
So I like to tell everybody what we are doing, and when you come with me and I give you advice, I'm a good mitigator of process, but I'm not a guarantor of success, because at the end of the day, we always seem to ignore that whatever you want to call it, God, the universe, is in charge. Yeah, and I have learned a hard lesson. By all means, I could have had this and this going for me at various times. I do have several exits, but it's never a constant ladder or a constant process, because you have to be humble enough to understand that it may not have been your time at that point in time. And then you need to live through that process. And many people seem to overlook this.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. If you don't overlook the process, it's part of the journey. And you're seeing Axel here and myself that are continuing to be resilient. We recover, we get clarity, and we move forward. Axel, I so appreciate you being here on the podcast. We're going to provide links to Pitch Global. You can connect with Axel on LinkedIn. We're connected, so just look up Axel Tillmann, look up Pitch Global. Axel, again, I just want to say thank you for being on the podcast with us. It's really a pleasure having you here.
David, it was a great pleasure to me. One last fantastic radical forgiveness. Never anything is done to you, it's done for you.
I love that. Thank you so much, Axel. Thanks everybody for being on the podcast with us. Please, of course, like and subscribe. Leave your comments. We'll definitely respond to them. I'll be sharing them with Axel. And until next time, take care. Be well, everybody. Thanks for listening in.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.